Amazing. Thank you so much. Hello and welcome to everyone. This is session 3 of Obesity Canada's Connected Conversation series. And today's conversation is titled Fighting for Care, How Weight Bias and Discrimination Impact Obesity Treatment in Canada. And I know already, I can tell this one is going to be a bit of a good one. So thank you for joining us today. If you're here live or if you're watching this recording later, absolutely hope you follow along and welcome the opportunity to make this a genuine conversation as well. So as we move through the conversation today, we're going to have the chat open for questions. So you can feel free to chime in there. And then I have my co-facilitator here today is Dr. Ian Patton, who is our Director of Advocacy and Public Engagement here at Obesity Canada.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. So I just want to, before I introduce our amazing guests today and to get to the heart of the matter, I wanted to remind everybody about why we're here and what we're doing. So as a reminder, these connected conversations are really rooted in the pillars of the work that Obesity Canada is doing. And our work is really rooted in education, research, and advocacy. And we tend to have kind of two different groups of people that we talk to. We have our professional side, which are the healthcare practitioners, those working in the professional space, and the researchers. And then we have our public group, which are those of us that are living with obesity or supporting people living with obesity. And we really saw an opportunity last year to try and create some moments of connection and create these conversations where we can merge these two audiences together and really try and move the conversations forward and have genuine conversations and maybe have some uncomfortable conversations along the way. So I'm excited for this opportunity to talk through this one and to really try and encourage some more dialogue along the way. I think we're going to touch on a few things today that include that bias, different treatment modalities, and kind of how patients can help show up for themselves and also help show up to kind of help improve the system that is meant to be supporting us. So by way of introduction to myself as well, my name is Lisa Schaefer. I am chair of the Public Engagement Committee at OC. And I have been doing this advocacy work since 2017 with Obesity Canada, and it is my absolute thrill to do this. My lived experience is a big part of how I navigate these conversations, and that included having a gastric sleeve myself in 2015. And our guest today, Dr. Sampath, was my surgeon for that, but I just want to offer that in transparency. It won't necessarily impact our conversation today. So I want to introduce Dr. Sampath and say hello and welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. So as I kind of led at the top there, we know that our conversation today is how weight bias and discrimination is impacting obesity treatment. One of my favorite things about you is when we were discussing what to call this, you called it out. Why don't we talk about this as the last acceptable form of discrimination? And that to me speaks volumes about who you are and how you approach the work that you have been doing. So I would love if you could take a moment and introduce yourself beyond the facts that I have here, that you are the director of the Richmond Hospital Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery Program. You've also founded the BC Obesity Society, and I believe you are the vice president of the Canadian Association of Bariatric Physicians and Surgeons. And in your spare time, you're also a father and an amazing human. So that's what I know to be true. If you could introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into the work that you have been doing, I think that would be a great place to start.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. That was a phenomenal introduction, and it makes me sound a lot cooler than I am, but I appreciate that. This has been something I've been very passionate about, the field of obesity management and treatment and advocacy since I was a resident, actually, because when I was a resident, we received just about zero lectures or teaching or any sort of educational format on the subject of obesity. And then one of my senior residents went to the States and did a rotation in bariatric surgery and came back and talked to us about that. And it was my first exposure and it blew my mind. And she went on to talk to us about how she was also living with obesity and how the treatments options were laid out in the States, how they had much superior access to what we have in Canada. And she put it in a sense of the treating the whole patient. And so when I, as a general surgeon, fix a hernia, then I have fixed a hernia. When I've taken out cancer, well, that's really great, and I feel awesome about it, and I'm a part of this patient's care for a long time. But I've only impacted that one, that your gallbladder, your hernia, your et cetera. That's kind of one aspect of your health. And with bariatric surgery, we're open to now joining a team, which we otherwise never do, and to try to be involved in the patient's overall health and try to tackle multiple problems at once, and really hopefully improve quality of life, length of life, all the important things that are that make life awesome.
Love that. And that is a huge part of the work we do. I know Ian and I often talk about, we just want people to know that they're allowed to show up and lead these juicy lives, regardless of what their body size is looking like. And I think that's a huge part of this. And I think that's a really nice segue into kind of talking about bias for a little bit here, and how bias kind of impacts our ability to access care, what care looks like when we do finally get into the system, and kind of how we can call that out and try and change the conversation a little bit. So we know that obesity is a chronic disease, and that's a lead dog in many conversations. And I think, from an Obesity Canada perspective, we're at the place where we believe that to be true. We know that to be true. And I am a person who believes that when we know better, we do better. So now we've got a whole pile of people recognizing this as a disease, but we still aren't doing the do better part necessarily. And I think that comes, and Ian and I have had this experience both personally and also in the work that we're doing in creating these online communities of people living with obesity. There's some self-bias that we walk in the door with that I imagine as the person dealing on the other side, trying to help patients understand, can be a lot to kind of unpick. And one thing that I truly appreciated about the Richmond Metabolic Program was that it was that whole patient modality. And it was that idea that there's time and care given in the lead up to if surgery is going to be part of your path, and that there is care and follow-up afterwards. So that sounds like that's been kind of core to your understanding and kind of a key difference maker for you. But I'd love your perspective on that bias that patients walk in with, and kind of how can we help that conversation, and what does that look like in the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two pieces to that. And we can start with the bias component. Yes, as healthcare practitioners, we're certainly not the most guilty of bias. I think the general population is slightly behind us, but we should be the leaders here. We should be the ones to say, okay, we're going to tackle this head on. We don't tolerate discrimination and bias in any other facet of healthcare. Why do we tolerate it here? We certainly don't accept any comments based on race or gender or sexual orientation, religion, etc. But we would listen to someone, and I hate to trash my own colleagues, but I've heard it before when someone will make a fat joke, and you'll have to say, hey, hold on a second. That's a human being. We don't talk like that. This is a disease process. Better, right? You shouldn't, and that's difficult. I'm sure I've made lots of enemies saying that kind of, not enemies, but I've ruffled feathers, and that's okay. Sometimes, as Lisa, I think you're great at this. You have to point out that you're entitled to your opinion. This is your saying, I'm stealing it from you, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And then it's okay to tell people that, and to bring them on board. And that same holds true. That bias same for sure holds true with our patients as well, because I really believe that people who are going to do really well with bariatric surgery have to come to a place where they understand that it's not a your fault disease. It's a very complex disease. It's a disease that it is a disease. It's not a problem. It's not a weakness. And it requires a multidisciplinary, thoughtful, timely type of therapy. And part of that timeliness is waiting for the patient to be in the right place to be ready for that therapy, because all of this stuff is big. And going through the process and living with bariatric surgery is not a chip shot. It is hard. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of diligence and follow-up, etc. And part of being ready for that is to know, yeah, okay, I have a disease, and this is not my fault. And it's I'm part of the solution, but I am not the problem. And I think that's the bias we have to unpack, and people have to get there at their own pace. There's no that you can't force people to adopt your beliefs, because just because I believe something doesn't mean they have to. And when they're ready, they're ready.
I think there's something. Those are all great points. There's something that kind of jumped into my head as we were listening to you here talking. So you had the 2 points. We have our internalized bias from the patient standpoint. We have the bias that we've talked about, at great lengths when it comes to like the health professionals and stuff like that. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on like, do you think that there's bias in the health system that limits our access to obesity treatment and care? Do you think that plays a role in like, provincial health organizations and how they approach obesity management?
Well, I don't think so. I know so. That's a bit of a leading question, but yes, absolutely. We can. Everyone makes the same example. Well, I make the same example. There's no cap on the number of cancer surgeries I do, or hernia surgeries, or gallbladders, or whatever. There's no in the middle of the night. Well, you've fixed 15 perforated ulcers this year, so this person doesn't get their perforated ulcer fixed. Those are just diseases. This is a disease. We treat. The Canada Health Act requires that we provide care for everything for all Canadians, and we just don't do it. And I think that's because of an internalized systematic bias in the health system that says, yeah, you know what? Most of the population doesn't see it the way that you and I, Ian and Lisa, see it. And so if they're not going to get on board and get excited about it and say we demand some change, we don't really have to report to anyone. We're not going to ruffle any feathers. So we're just going to leave things as status quo and just say, we know the wait list is there, but we'll find ways to tell you the wait list really isn't there. And they'll throw some real they'll throw out some alternative facts to tell us that the wait list is pretty small and really that we're delivering excellent care. And the reality is that is not the case.
It's another interesting point that I did want to touch on. I don't know if we'll get to it a little bit later, but when you talk about the wait times and stuff, we have our report card on access to care that we did the last one was in 2019. And it, across the board, Canada did really terrible when it came to access to things like bariatric surgery or any obesity care, whatever it was. But the wait times is one that really interests me because according to the report card and the data that we have from all the provincial organizations, it's almost like they sugarcoat it because it might say that the wait time for bariatric surgery is 12 months in Ontario, which when you consider all the appointments that we have to go through as part of that process and stuff, that doesn't seem like it's the end of the world. It's all right. But when you actually talk to patients across the country, the wait times that they actually experience from the time that they go to their doctor and they decide that they're going to go into and get referred to a bariatric program is much, much longer. And like in some cases, it's years and years, and their experience is much worse. So that's bad enough as it is, but we're talking about a chronic disease. What can happen? Like what's the impact on that individual when they have to wait 3 years for a treatment when they don't have access to other treatments that could help? It's
If you don't mind, I'm gonna tackle the first part first and say, like, let's just draw this out for people that are listening today and maybe they haven't gone through bariatric surgery or not, or they are on a wait list or not, or in their different province. And so in BC, I can speak to BC and I can speak to in a limited extent to the rest of the country. Yeah, every province is doing terribly, but this is how it works. First, you go to your family doctor. You have multiple conversations with your family doctor. If they're supportive, if they're involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, the two of you decide that bariatric surgery may be a good path to go down, right? So you get a referral. In BC, from the time you get a referral to the time you see the first member of the team is roughly 2.5 years, roughly, give or take, okay? Sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. And then you work with our team in a process called precondition. We call preconditioning. We work with every member of the team. You take various courses. We provide additional support. We do some counseling, et cetera, et cetera. We get you ready for surgery. We do the necessary testing. Then you meet the surgeon. That's roughly another 6 to 9 months in people who end up going down the road. And then you have surgery. And previously, that period of time was only 3 or 4 months, because by the time you met me, you were ready, you were cleared, you were in a good place. The team thought you had all the tools ready, and they'd done a good job providing those tools. You're ready to go. That's 3-4 months. And that's the number that the government would always pipe up about. Oh, there's only 150 people on the surgical wait list. but they forgot about the other 3,400 people waiting to come to the program and are who are currently in the program, which is about the current number right now. Okay, so 2.5 years plus 6 to 9 months plus 3 or 4 months, you're at 3.5 years. COVID's pushed you back another 6 months, maybe it's 4 years now. So that there's that plus there's 3,400 people waiting to get a surgery date in British Columbia right now that I know of, and these numbers are a little slow to update, so it's as of last month, I believe. And we only do 440, 50 surgeries a year. So, if not everyone gets to surgery, maybe it's 2,000 people get to surgery. It's still 3 years, 4 years to be able to get down that road, right? To even catch up on that number. So we're doing abysmally for sure. And just to put it in a historical perspective, when we started the Richmond Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery, there was only one other center in the province in Victoria, and at their lowest, they were only doing 100 cases. So we've been able to negotiate up to 450, which is, to be honest, it's still one of my professional ongoing disappointments that I haven't been able to do better. Not for lack of trying, but just for lack of, I guess we're just trying to find the right buttons to push to get the right people to say yes. I think we were really close pre-COVID. I think we were like 98% there to be able to do some really good improvement in access to care. And then COVID allowed everyone to say, oh, rightly so to a certain extent, but they refocused their energies on everything else. So we're going to put a pause on everything we were discussing. But the problem is when you put a pause on things, they tend to go to sleep and hibernate. And then to bring them back up again it's almost like starting from scratch. The second point here, the second question you mentioned was what happens to someone in that 3.5, 4 years? And I don't have any good data on this, but it's just, if you're living with obesity and that obesity is causing medical problems like diabetes, like sleep apnea, and ultimately like heart failure, ultimately like degenerative joint disease that needs hip replacement, knee replacement, all the other things, that ain't getting better waiting. That is just going to progress. And in some people, it progresses to a point where they come to the surgical setting and they're actually no longer fit for surgery. They're actually too sick now to be able to undergo a general anesthetic and have a surgery. Fortunately, that's not a common thing. As a chronic disease, we fortunately are able to intervene most of the time before we get to that point. But that doesn't mean we're doing a good job. That means we're still doing a relatively suboptimal job. We would never tolerate this with any other surgical wait list. Not hips, not knees, not cataracts, not hernias. We would just not accept that. The population would accept that. And I think we're now accepting, allowing people to deteriorate in their health to the point where the bypass that I do, the SADI that I do, the duodenal switch that I do, may not pull you out of your diabetes anymore because you've gone on to become an insulin dependent diabetic and your diabetes is quite brittle and it just, your pancreas has run out of its reserve. And now we might improve your diabetes and we might give you a bit more time, but we had a chance to get rid of it. And we've lost that window of opportunity. Everything in this game is about your window of opportunity, getting the patient who is ready and preconditioned and in the right place to go through the surgery at the right time for their health with the right access to resources. There's always that window and that starts to close.
Yeah, that's, I think it's also important to put all of that in the context of with all the other obesity treatments that are out there, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or medications, and working with a team that understands obesity, even having trained professionals, is not something we have great access to here in Canada. So you've got these people that are on wait lists to get into bariatric programs or to have surgery, and they're getting sicker and sicker, their disease is progressing, and they don't have access to the things outside of that bariatric program that could help support them or hold things off or maybe improve their situation either. So it's kind of like there's a no-win situation here that we're kind of living in.
Well, I hope it's not no win, or else this we
I was about to say, hey, Debbie Downer.
No, well, you know what I mean. Like it's
yeah. I mean, it's a vicious cycle here. I get what you're saying, and I totally agree. And I think and we didn't even touch on the medications, and we didn't touch on the outside of the bariatric program care from counselors, from bariatricians in the community, et cetera, from dietitians in the community, all these other folks that are providing excellent multidisciplinary care. We didn't touch on that, and none of that is really readily available. And I wholly support, oh, sorry, I lost my earpiece. I wholly support, I got too excited and lost my earpiece. If you get me on these rants, it's
I love
just, I wholly support the funding of the complete spectrum of care. I do one part,
Yes.
everyone else does another part, and together we do a big thing, right? Together with the patient, we do big stuff. I'm here, everyone else is here, and then this is the whole package, right? And you can't do one without the other. It's especially as the medications get so much more powerful, and as our cognitive behavioral therapy and all the other treatment modalities are getting so much better. We need to give people access. It is part of the mandate of the Canada Health Act. It's not optional. It's not something we would be nice to do. It's something that we are mandated to do, and that's the frustrating part.
And that is, I think, the root of it. When I talk about bias, I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were chatting. We see this bias is impacting us. We know that is myself as a patient. Perhaps I eat part of the window because I have so much shame about even raising my hand and asking for help, because I incorrectly believe that I have 100% created this moment that I am in, which is way too simplistic and doesn't recognize the fact that, over 70% of the determinants of our weight are genetic or elements that we are just never going to be able to touch. I can't get into the cortex of my brain by running on a treadmill. And I believed that for many years and punished myself for that for many, many years. So that's one way that bias is impacting us. We also know that we live in this pervasive diet culture mentality, and that I adore you as physicians, but you are also exposed to the same diet culture nonsense that is out there, that has created this environment where we have people in larger bodies, or people living with obesity or living with complex issues as a result of obesity, that feel that it is their problem and their issue. And then we have a world of humans on the outside of us reminding us that we're doing it wrong, that we don't understand, that we're lazy or non-compliant. And if we would just be compliant, the world would look a lot better and healthier. And it's sad when we walk in, and that's actually what we hear from our healthcare people when we walk in the door to even try and ask for help. I remember one of my first conversations with the GP was, I believe I should talk to a bariatrician. And I was told that wasn't a word. And that was genuinely the end of the conversation. That was a while ago, but that is a genuine experience. And I know we're not alone in that. So it's interesting as we have these conversations about bias, that I have yet to have a moment where someone challenges me back and says, that's not the case. Nope, this bias doesn't exist. You're wrong. The conversation is always around, how do we justify the bias? And I find that really, really interesting and a very salient moment that I think we can use to challenge some of these moments and say, how is it ever going to be justified that you can say that there is a cap of 440 surgeries in a year for a disease state that we know is impacting the economy, that's impacting our social systems, that's stopping people from showing up for themselves and contributing to kind of create a healthier, happier world, which is what we all need right now. There is no question in this. This apparently is just me on my soapbox for a moment, gentlemen.
Oh, I was kind of like, did I miss the question?
No, there's no question there. That was
I screwed it up. I missed the question.
No, that was me just stating my beliefs. Sorry, Ian, jump in.
Let me just say ditto to everything you just said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump on there and with the point that both of you have made about the cap of bariatric surgery, for example. In your experience, have they given you, has that question been asked? Why aren't we doing more? And what's the response you're getting from the policymakers or from the people who make the decision on that?
Oh, yeah, that's the standard response is, you're just one of many other programs needing more funding. So we're just trying to balance it all, and just, okay, well, that's fine, but we haven't had an increase in our volumes for several years, closing in on 5-6 years now, and even that was a pittance. And on top of this is a disease process that affects up to 20% of the population. That's more than hypertension. That's more than diabetes, more than heart disease. You treat all of that willy-nilly, and at a huge cost. This will save those costs. This will save dollars in the healthcare system, and is being proven to do so. We have capacity in the hospital. This is the standard argument I go through. We have capacity to do more. We have the staffing to do more. We have the beds to do more. We can care for more people. We can deliver this care, and people don't have to be waiting for 3, 4, 5 years for something that they deserve when they deserve it, right? And it's always this go, okay, well, we'll get back to you. We'll see what we can do. We'll get back to you. And then, as is the case with ministries and bureaucracies, there's to get back to you, the phone doesn't ring all that often. And then there's a turnover, and you find out that person went on to a different position, and it's a new person. So you start again. And I've been starting that over again for about 11 years now, is the discussion we keep trying to have in various forums. We've gone to media with our patients. We've done patient advocacy, letter writing campaigns. We've gone to every level of ministry and government. And, again, it's that pervasive weight bias that they're just not aware that they have this mentality, and they're just, and it stops them from making the right decision. And I think that's the problem, is there's a big educational push to try to teach folks about what is obesity, what is it to live with obesity, why this is a chronic disease, and why we can intervene and both help people and the healthcare system and society. But that kind of thing takes time. If you think about it, it's kind of like when I was a kid, and this is a kind of a terrible example, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. When I was a kid, there was HIV/AIDS was a new thing, right? And nobody knew much about it, and it was all shame and blame, very similar to what we're talking about now. And there was a ton of bias against the homosexual community, the queer community, LGBTQ community, and all sorts of pseudo facts came out. It was, we have to wrap straws so nobody touches another straw. You can get AIDS from a straw at a restaurant, right? There was just garbage data that came out, and people, they truly thought they were doing the right thing. I'm not sure how this works, but it took a long process of education to say, first of all, human beings are human beings, and your sexual orientation has nothing to do with how we treat a person. Okay, well, that took a few decades. Second of all, HIV and AIDS is spread this way. This is how we tackle it. This is how we as a community learn about it. And this is how we prophylax against it and treat it. So all of these things took a long time. And I'm sure that this is going to eventually hit a tipping point where the similar discussion happens with the discussion around obesity. It takes time. It takes time for people to take what they intrinsically believe to be true and turn it around into what we know to be fact. This is a disease between your gut hormones and centers in your brain, and it is a genetically driven disease. And I'm sorry to tell you, you can't jump on the treadmill and get into your brain, as Lisa mentioned. That's a weird kind of neurosurgery that isn't possible yet. This is just a disease that needs to be treated. It's very complicated. We understand very little of it. We're learning more, but it's a disease.
So true.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I'd like to kind of just drive the conversation to a little bit, and I know you have some experience with this as well. Another fallout of these wait times is we then see surgical travel happening, which then also just adds another strain onto the healthcare system as well, correct? From your experience, Dr. Sampath, how do we feel about that component of it?
Well, I used to feel like kind of irritated. Okay, you went and got care somewhere else, and now it's 2 a.m. and I've got to fix this problem. And then I realized how silly that irritation, that feeling of irritation was, because these are people who were left out to dry. There was no other option, and they were desperate to advocate for their own health, and when their own communities wouldn't do it for them, and their own governments wouldn't do it for them, their own doctors wouldn't do it for them. So they did what they could, right? They did what they could with the money they had, which sucks because I'm so against people spending money on care that should just be provided. But they did it, and then they were left hanging out to dry because they came back and they had a sleeve in Mexico or a band in somewhere or a mini bypass in India, and some did really well, and some had really horrific complications. And you know what? It's you just can't. There's nothing to say for it. You just say, listen, I get where you came from. You were feeling like you needed to do something for your own health, and you did the best you could with the resources available. And now we're just going to try and help you. So, I mean, it's a huge burden on the system, sure, but there's an easy way out. The system could just fund more surgery locally, fund more access to medication and medical therapy locally, and then they don't have to. Then they don't have to be so frustrated. It's easy. Just do the right thing.
Thank you. I appreciate all of those words, and I thank Penny as well in the chat, who's also making some comments here, because it's so true. I've also met people through my path who have taken that journey and decided they needed to do for themselves and did medical tourism, and now they feel almost more paralyzed to even go ask for help, because now there's second coat of shame has been wrapped around me of I went outside the lines, and they haven't, to your point, and also still deserve care, attention, and treatment for what they're trying, what needs to be done. If we're doing things like rearranging our insides, that's a serious moment as well.
Yeah, it's serious. And if it's not done right in a multidisciplinary way, that you end up getting into more trouble than if you did it the other way. And it's still not your fault. And that's probably roughly 20% of my practice now, is to try to kind of get people out of that vicious cycle of complication that happens with surgery that isn't surveilled, right? We have to watch what happens and care for the complications and prevent the complication. And, all too often, I don't want to speak poorly of the foreign centers, but they'll take your money, they'll do your surgery, and then it's a good bye-bye. And most of the time, they're not calling you to see how you are, or, checking your blood work. They can't, but they knew that, and they still offered you the surgery, which to me is ethically a little bit confounding. But they did it. They took your money, and then you said bye-bye, and then you went home, and then something happened, and now again, second coat of shame. You got to go to your family doctor and say, who's going to take care of this? And they'll say, throw their hands up. What did you do? No one's going to take care of this. Why did you do this? And then eventually, through some unnecessarily circuitous path, they'll come to somebody on my team, and we'll try our best. And hopefully we get to them before it's got to a point where we can't reverse the damage.
And I think there's something in there too that I'd like to pick up, because I think this is a natural connection point in my brain, but we'll see if this resonates with you as well, Ian. I know Ian and I have had this conversation where, we were both part of peer support in and around our surgical programs or our surgery itself. And those communities can get a little bit dirty, is the word I'm going to use today. They can get a little muddy and complicated themselves. And what we can see in those worlds is we can see those people where surgery was absolute great swing hit out the park, you're doing fantastic. They tend to be quite vocal, and they're still in those communities, lots of before and after photos. And then there's people like myself, I can speak from my experience, where I wasn't having that exact same experience. Was I healthier? Absolutely. Was I in a great place, on a good trajectory? In hindsight now, yes. Lisa 2019 probably was losing her mind a little bit about that, though, and not feeling like a success. And that also can be a really remiss moment to kind of try and come back to the program and ask for help, because again, I felt like a compounded failure, where I was given this magical opportunity. I was one of 400 people that was granted and deserved this surgery, which is, I also want to deflate that bubble a whole bunch, because it's not a behavior. It's not something we should need to deserve, to your point earlier, Dr. Sampath. But, how can we help those conversations and help people understand that, yes, surgery is an amazing tool, but it is a really complicated disease that we're dealing with. And sometimes we need to come back and ask for help. Sometimes revisions are going to be a possibility, and sometimes they are not. And I'd love to have a conversation with you about that as well. And then layer in that, if it makes sense, some of the medication conversation.
Yeah, I think as we expand our surgical repertoire, like when you had your surgery, we were at 2 surgeries we could offer. Now we're at 4, and things are kind of when you had your surgery, probably 2 medications were on the market, maybe 3. I can't recall exactly the timing. Now there's multiple, and we just, this is a totally different world. And yeah, I think if I back up and take a bigger picture perspective, surgery is definitely not for everyone, because there is no one treatment for a very complicated disease. That's like saying everyone who's a diabetic only gets this medication, right? That doesn't make any sense. There's different medications we would try. There's the oral medications, there's insulins, there are different types of insulin, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole spectrum of therapy and that we would try to engage in to get the best result. Some people are great surgical candidates, and some people, either for their own medical history, maybe they have some complicated other stuff going on with their medications and their medical history, or for reasons that they're not really in a place where they are interested or ready for surgery. There's a myriad of reasons why it's not for everyone. In fact, it's only for a very small percentage of people living with obesity. So there's that, and the medications have a role, and everything else has a role. But I think it's not a one size fits all world. Everybody is a bit different, and how we tailor their care is a bit different depending on their needs. And I think that's something that really has to, again, it's based on timing. When you're ready, you're ready.
Yeah. I have a question that kind of ties into the thread that we were just talking about, and it was someone who went out of country for their surgery, and then because the wait list in Ontario was so long, and then they ended up moving to Alberta, got injured at work, and then has suffered regain since that. And so they went back to their program and asked for help, or tried to get a referral to the bariatric program in Alberta to get some help, and was looking into a revision, and was pretty much outright refused and told that wasn't an option for them. And so for someone like that, like maybe surgery or revision wasn't the right option for them, what's their recourse? Like, what can they do when they're in that situation where they feel like they've exhausted all ends, there's nothing left for them to do? Like, where do we go from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it becomes a bit of a nuanced discussion based on what the complication was, what the reason for weight gain was, et cetera, and why they were declined from a surgical center. Again, some centers do what we do and some don't. And so that's a hard one to pin down, but I would say there's always recourse, right? The first thing is to find a supportive family practitioner, family physician, and some support in the community as best as you can. Again, the online support can sometimes be a bit, I don't want to call it dirty because I'll just get slammed for that, but
Muddy.
that's muddy, yes.
Muddy.
It's variable. But then that almost every province now has programs with bariatricians and allied health teams that are outside of a surgical center, where you can consider the medical options and the other counseling support that can be very useful. Again, medications are getting good enough that they're going to rival very soon some of the surgeries that we do. I think for me, I think they'll be catching up to the sleeve pretty quickly, and that's great. It just really, that part's great. It's just access is the important thing, because if it's 10 grand a pop for your medications, then it's coming out of pocket. It's like the medications never existed, right? So again, that's where the advocacy work that you folks are doing at Obesity Canada to try and get all of these things covered. I mean, I'm wholly supportive of that.
Yeah. There's one other thread I did want to kind of pull on that we were talking about, just kind of cycling back to when you were talking about HIV/AIDS and the bias and stuff that they experienced, and then kind of tying into the length between, us understanding something and then it actually becoming like common knowledge in the public. And it was interesting because when we have our conference at the end of October, our public conference, Obesity Canada's conference that we're having, we have one of our speakers who happens to be a patient advocate from the HIV/AIDS community, Louise Binder, and she's really, really well known, and she's, was at the forefront of that fight. And so she's someone who I think we can learn a great deal from in terms of like what it was like experiencing that bias and how to change it. And hopefully we can learn from, mistakes of the past or the successes that people in that fight went through, so we can kind of speed up that process. But as a academic, someone like when I was coming through doing my graduate work, I was always told that from the point of time where, you know, a study is done, we've got new knowledge, to that becoming common knowledge in the public could be like upwards of 10 years for that knowledge translation. And that's really unacceptable. And I think when we had the clinical practice guidelines that were published last year, at least in my experience, the conversations that I've had with people who don't know much about obesity or who are trying to find out a little bit more, they become a little bit easier because we have something that we can point to. Um, but is there anything that we should be or can be doing to speed up that knowledge translation for general public, for physicians, policymakers? Like, you know, you talked about with the policymakers, you know, you start working with them, you start teaching them, and then, you know, as soon as you get somewhere, they're moving on to something else. And so it's like that has to speed up so that we can get through it faster and we can make it more, um, make it, you know, get that knowledge translation done a lot faster. Is there anything we should be doing as a collective, whether that's as, you know, patients ourselves or you know, health professionals? Like, what should we be looking at in terms of that?
Yeah, there's lots of things. And I kind of divide it into three groups that we have to tackle. We have to tackle the healthcare professionals because they're the ones who, as a group, have the biggest outspoken voice or one of the biggest outspoken voices. If they say, we all agree that we've looked at this the wrong way, obesity is a chronic disease, and we're doing a bit of an about face now, and we do agree to support it. Let's go to the folks in the bureaucracy and try to get some change done. That's huge, right? So the discussion like I said, in my residency, in my medical school, maybe I had half an hour of teaching on obesity as a disease, half an hour. I did 14 years of training. Like, that's insane. Like, I can't do that math. I'm not smart enough for it, but it was very little. Okay. And so you got to start. You got to start with the medical students. You got to start with the residents. You got to hit the family physicians, the specialists, and that's part of what the BC Obesity Society does locally. It's what you like Obesity Canada and CABS is trying to do on a national level, and every province is trying to do their bit. So that's number one. Number two is the general population, and I think that unfortunately will be the lag because it's just so ingrained that that the bias is it's going to take a bit more time. But the one thing I'll say that is promising is you take a look at how long it took for us to kind of turn the opinion of people with the LGBTQ community at the very start, and how much quicker it's going now. Like in terms of gender reassignment surgery and whatnot. That acceptance has come a lot faster than I would have predicted. Okay, people understand. They understand that it's important. They understand it's that people deserve access to care, and so whatever is being done in those forums is actually kind of it's kind of a snowball effect to a certain extent. The same thing will hold true with if you look at people, the BIPOC community, and the snowball effect that's kind of happening there. And I'm hopeful that that opens all of our hearts a little bit to saying, well, maybe we got to look at a second time at how I look at this other person sitting across from me. What are my kind of the bias that I bring to the table when I just look at this person on the bus and they're living with obesity, and I say, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, they must not be exercising and they must be kind of lazy. Instead, I'm opening my heart and saying, okay, well, actually, what is that person's life like? Is everyone on the bus thinking the same stuff? What a horrible thing to think. If I understand this is a disease, maybe I just I can kind of control, alt, delete that processing and just start from scratch, where I look at it from a scientific perspective and a human perspective and not from a biased perspective, right? And so that I'm hopeful that the education of the community at large will kind of parallel what we're doing with the BIPOC community, LGBTQ community. That's my hope, and I hope it is a bit of a snowball effect as well from the work that so many people are doing. What can people living with obesity, people on this chat, people who are advocating do? Well, I think first you gotta it depends where you're at in your journey. Like, if you're comfortable going to your family doctor and saying, hey, listen, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit. If you're comfortable going to your MLA and saying, hey, listen, this is my journey. I want to talk to you a little bit about it. These are some things that we've been talking about. This is we see that this is looked at as a your fault problem, but here's the reasons why it's a disease, and here's the reasons why it requires treatment. If you're comfortable writing letters to your MLA and Minister of Health, et cetera, then I would wholly support that as well. I mean, I think the more that the people in the bureaucracies get this information, the harder it is to ignore. Harder it is for them to put their head in the sand and say, that's somebody, my term's coming up. I'm really worried about my reelection. Then I got 4 years and I don't care after that. Their 4-year cycle mentality, you have to intervene and say, listen, no, this isn't a 4-year thing. This is a human being's life thing. So let's just, you can't put your head in the sand and say, this is unimportant to me today. You just have to say, okay, well, maybe this is something you can get on the board this train and be a vocal proponent, and actually this can be part of your legacy, is to be one of those people who does the right thing, is an early adopter of doing right. Not early adopter, but you make them feel like it is.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's an interesting kind of thought process with the work that I do and the work that Obesity Canada does. It's like, where do we start? What's what's going to have the biggest bang for the buck? Do we put our effort into training health professionals? Is that where we should be doing, so that they can then go, educate and inform their patients and the communities that they work within? And that makes sense. And then, but should there also be a bottom-up approach of, educating and empowering the individuals living with obesity themselves, so that they can start asking questions of their health professionals and getting them to, kind of create a demand for more education and information. So it's tough to kind of decide where. I think we got to do it all. You can't focus on one. It's something that everything has to kind of happen at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be concurrent, but I do think there is one thing we can do, and it's we can all speak with the same language and talking points, right? I think if everyone is giving a slightly different messaging, it's too much. It gets lost in the wind. But if we have here's the educational package that we're going to use as our talking points, and I think Obesity Canada has done a very nice job of this for our healthcare professionals. Here's the talking points we're going to use for people in the ministry, people who are MLAs, people in government. These are the talking points we're going to use. And if we say the same thing over and over again, it kind of gets harder to ignore. If you say different things, it's easy for them to be like, oh, I'm confused now. I'm just going to close this chapter and just move on to something else that I can easily understand. Human beings, rightly or wrongly, we have limited attention spans. And, to break that bias cycle, you have to have something that's kind of catchy and quick. They have to be able to say, these are the 3 reasons that the way I was thinking was inappropriate, and I've got to recalibrate a little bit. And then I can get behind that. I can explain that to my neighbor. Because if you can, that's something I got to be honest, I have this conversation all the time, and I still struggle to convince people that, I have friends and colleagues who will say, well, the eat less, exercise more garbage. I still struggle to concisely explain why that is scientifically inaccurate and doomed to failure, right? And I think, if we had the same talking points and Obesity Canada, CABS, every organization use the same stuff, it would be hugely beneficial.
I like that. Ian, add that to your to-do list.
To my to-do list, yeah.
To-do list. But I totally agree. And I think that's really the core of it, is we need to be consistent to help people move into this, new way of thinking. I don't want to call it new because it really isn't new, but that is one thing that I say on repeat as well, is I believe in the neuroplasticity of humans. It is possible for us to update this programming. I know it is possible. We just need to really commit to it and understand why systemically it's needed as well. And it's, we're fighting a really big battle. We're taught from our fairy tales and from our childhood that big equals lazy equals bad, all those things. Like, it's that level. And it sounds silly to talk about LeFou from Beauty and the Beast, but it is a prime example of the way children are introduced to understanding body diversity. And that's something that we need to bust up. Then we see we're sending kids to our schools that are, part of our government funding. And then again, we're teaching them forks and feet. It's all about that. And, that is an important conversation. And Ian and I talk about that all the time, that, diet and exercise absolutely still has a place in this conversation when we're talking about obesity and treatment. And that's about controlling what you can control and showing up for yourselves. And that good diet and exercise are part of a healthy lifestyle for every Canadian in this country. Great. How does that help me with my chronic disease?
Yeah, and when I'm talking about diet and exercise, it's just that exactly. It's not that you can't have the tunnel vision of saying that is the sole and complete treatment that we can offer you, is those two things. Because those two things in and of themselves are great in, like, as that's the easy talking point, right? That's the snippets that the general public uses against us. And so to counteract that, I mean, I totally echo this. I hear this, I read the same things with my kids' books, and it's the same conversations that I have, that this was written a long time ago, and we don't talk like that, and we don't look at people this way, and it becomes harder and harder when it's pervasive, right? I mean, but as you see again with with cartoons and with comics and with representation in media, you see more people of color, you see a bit more body diversity, a little bit, you see more people from different communities, and the LGBTQ community, and it becomes more and more, like, again, from a parent perspective, I see two men kissing on screen and my kids see that. I think I would have never seen that when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. That would have been like a big shock thing. Now it's just two people who love each other, sharing a kiss, and move forward, right? And my kids don't see that as a problem anymore. Dad, can a man and a man be married? Yeah, absolutely. And can a woman and a woman be married? Absolutely. And you and mommy are married? Yeah, sometimes she wants to kill me, but yes, we're married. And at the end of the day, once the kids are introduced to these ideas early, they're not allowed to kind of bear these terrible biases into their soul. It's just they should just open they're raised with this openness, and I love it. And I think it's super amazing to see it. And I want to see that with body diversity as well. I want to see the cartoons and the comic books, and not shaming anyone just because their shape is different than my shape and my shape is different than your shape. It's okay. Are you a good person or are you a bad person? And if the kids understand that, that's good enough.
That's where we need to be focused, right? And that's another component, what you just mentioned there as well, is, body diversity is still a really big part of this conversation. Not every person who would walk in and have either one surgery or a surgery and a revision with you is going to achieve what society is telling us is the absolute goal either. And so, readjusting and helping people understand body diversity as a component of this, as well as the body autonomy, and that maybe surgery isn't for you. If it's not a tool that is going to make sense for you in your life, then that also needs to be a part of the conversation, and that people can have that conversation too, and decide whether or not it is the right moment or choice for them, regardless of what moment they're in. If that's something that really is important to them, let's honor that too. I think we've got a large cohort of people living with obesity that genuinely don't know how to show up for themselves, or what they are allowed or not allowed to say yes and no to as well in these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And I just go, like, just add to that point, I'd say, I, as a surgeon, I've done thousands of these surgeries, full spectrum of the surgeries, and I don't know what the impact is going to be if I do a surgery from one person to another. All things being equal, everyone eats the same, exercises the same, takes the supplements the same, goes to their appointments the same. I don't know whether my bypass on one person, it's the same bypass, to another person. I can't tell what that effect is going to be. And that's part of that understanding, is that, again, I can't promise anything, because we don't have that great an understanding into even how these surgeries work. We know they work. We know some of how they work. We probably will increase that knowledge substantially in the next 10 years. And maybe one day we can personalize the medicine to say, okay, well, person X, you come in with these things and these chemicals and these hormone levels and this, this is maybe the best treatment for you, this medication plus this surgery plus this type of counseling and this protocol, you're going to have the X protocol. Okay, great. But we're not there. We're not even close, right? And so part of understanding this is that, you know, it's totally fair to say surgery is not for me, because Dr. Sampath can't guarantee what the impact is going to be. He can't guarantee whether it's going to be a long-term issue. He can't tell me what might, you know, we can tell you the chances, but when it happens to you, if there's a complication, it's 100% for you, and whether it only happened to 1% of the population otherwise doesn't matter, right? So there's just, again, no guarantees in this, and so it's okay. The surgery is not always for everyone. That's okay.
100%. And I think that's part of a part of the hill that we need to climb together, is helping people understand this difference in that obesity as they understood it needs to shift. And also that we need to, I know nobody's going to like me saying this, slow down and consider each patient individually as well, because it is so complex and we do have the best information that we have going into it. But to your point, there's no guarantees, but we've seen this in other moments. There are different chemotherapy paths for people in cancer treatment. There are different insulin options for people living with diabetes as well. And sometimes you have to mix and match and try things, but we feel like this is such a pass fail behavioral disease right now that it's so hard not to come at it with solutions from that same lens. Oh, this is a good conversation, y'all, but I do want to be a little bit mindful of time. Ian, do we have anything left in the chats or comments that we want to talk through, or?
No, I think we're pretty good. I think we touched on most of the ones we want to get to. So if there's anything else we can.
Awesome. Dr. Sampath, any parting thoughts from you, or any wisdom that you want to leave us with? Feel free.
I'm not sure I have a lot of wisdom to give, but I'd say for people who are living with obesity and they kind of feel like the healthcare system is not, doesn't have their back, just know, I mean, there are a lot of people here, the folks at Obesity Canada, the folks at CABS, all of the people on my team and teams across the country. We really are doing our very best, and we are 100% committed to improving access to care. It'll happen, and if you're able to help to make that happen quicker, that we love it. We love it, and it's just remember, there are people who care, and we're gonna get you the care you need.
Amazing, thank you for that. And as you are doing things with your BC Obesity Society, know that you have my number, you know how to find me. Ian and I will happily lean in. And as well, we have created our online community of OC Connect, and happy to disseminate and get motivation and action as much as possible as we can in there. So thank you so much for today, Dr. Sampath. It's always a joy to spend time with you. And I love all of these conversations, even if they don't necessarily feel like we've got a path to clear solutions. I think just the conversations unto themselves, they're going to help clear the path and help people understand how they can show up and join us in these moments. So I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to connect with you. So as a reminder to those, yeah, for sure. As a reminder to those of you that have joined us today, if you're a healthcare professional or a researcher, we have an amazing online community called OC Connect Pro. We invite you to connect there. You can connect with peers, and you can also keep up with all of the work that Obesity Canada is doing. And right now we're really tracking towards our action teams and really creating a national framework for the understanding and treatment of obesity. We need you. We're looking for more support. So please join us in the OC Connect Pro world. If you are a member of the public, or if you're someone living with obesity, or if you have patients or people you want to drive to somewhere where they can get the right information and have these kinds of healthy conversations, please join us in OC Connect. It's our open online community for patients, caregivers, all of those kinds of people. We share information. We've created some amazing opportunities for people to connect and understand their different experiences. So we're really trying to empower people in there to be advocates for themselves and be able to show up. And one of the ways that you can also join us is on October 24th, as Ian had mentioned, we have our annual virtual summit for the public, which is called Connected 2021. Registration is available at obesitycanada.ca/connected. We have a day full of speakers who will be sharing lived experiences as well as experts on obesity management. And I am super excited because there's a large focus around knowing our rights as patients and how we can really use our voices, all these experiences that we're seeing in the chat, to really inform and make sure that our voices as the lived experience are there to help shape our national strategy and the way that we're going to create this healthy and amazing Canada for the next generation and for those behind us. So all the ways that we can continue these conversations, we will definitely have more sessions like this as well. So keep your eye out for the next dates of these. Otherwise, please take care of yourselves, wash your hands, be kind, and continue to be vocal for us and help make impact and change in this world of obesity. So thank you, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.